Hi everyone, I'm thriller author j.f.penn and today I'm here with Simon Toyne. Hi Simon.
Hello.
Hello, and just a little introduction. Simon is the best-selling author of the Sanctus Trilogy, translated into 28 languages and published in 50 countries. The first book was the UK's biggest-selling debut thriller of 2011, and all three books in the Sanctus Trilogy were Sunday Times bestsellers in hardback and paperback. And I love the Sanctus book, so I'm so excited to have Simon on the show.
It's very kind of you to say so. No money changed hands for those kind words. I'd
No,
like to point that
absolutely.
out.
So, I'm obviously a sucker for anything with a religious title or a broad brush cross on the front of a book. So I jumped on your books. But for people who haven't read the trilogy, can you kind of give us some broad brush story strokes?
I can't. Yeah, that's always the killer question, isn't it? Because you're sort of reducing like 1,500 pages worth into a kind of catchy thing that goes make by this book and doesn't make it sound really derivative and sucky. Um, but it's I mean, but at the heart of it is it's the fundamental idea that kind of kicked the whole thing off and grew into this trilogy was a notion that what if in the past, right at the beginning of history, right at the beginning of the time, when history took a right turn, what happened to the people who were left behind who kind of stayed on the left path effectively? It's a modern thriller, and it's very much it's about identity. Really, it's about the identity of the West, of Christianity and religion, Western religions in particular, organized religions, how they grew. But mirroring that, the human story is this sense of identity of my main character, who's a female journalist who has got identity issues of her own and gets kind of sucked into this huge mystery and this huge dangerous conspiracy. And actually, what she's really trying to do, what drives her, is not that she's trying to uncover some big faceless plot. Is she's trying to find out who she is. So that was the thing. That was the heart of it for me. It's this kind of story about identity, and it's got dangerous sects and killers, sect sects, and I should have not clarified that. I've probably got more readers, and it's got it's quite a techno thriller as well. There's lots of technology in it. The third one, the Tower, has got the Hubble Space Telescope, and it mirrors the Tower of Babel in that the telescope is looking to the furthest reaches of the universe and trying to gaze upon the face of God, which some people think is a heresy. And so I kind of tried to take all of those, the foundations of Western religion, particularly Christianity, and mirror them in individuals' lives in the present and our own situation, and pose the big what if of what if what we thought about religion and the origin of it was all a bit wrong.
What if, indeed?
What if, the big wig, the starting point, the seed from which all of these huge narrative trees grow.
Yeah, no, and it's great. And now what's kind of striking, even if people just download a sample, I think the beginning part is really striking because there's a monk who commits suicide off the top of this citadel of ruin. And I think ruin itself is almost a character. Maybe you could talk about ruin and your inspiration for the place.
Well, Ruin is where a lot of it takes part, and Ruin is the oldest continually inhabited city in the world, and it's situated in ancient Anatolia, well, ancient Mesopotamia, so the Fertile Crescent, the land between two rivers, and those two rivers being two of the rivers that flowed out of the Garden of Eden. So that's how old it is, which is now modern day Turkey, and the thing was, originally in my first draft I didn't want to say where I didn't want to say where Ruin was. I kind of wanted to kind of leave it vague. But like a character, the more I got into it and the more I had to sort of work out the history of it and the mythology of it and all this sort of stuff, I realized I had to say where it was. And Turkey was the best place because it's seen this huge amount of history kind of swishing through it, and it's right on the edge of Asia and Europe and the Middle East and the biblical land, so it's perfectly situated. And there's amazing history there. Troy is there, and Ephesus, exactly. I mean, it's like so much history. There's so much forgotten history that kind of predates what we think of as ancient history, which is generally Greek and Roman. It's like way beyond that. and even in Egypt, there were civilizations there before that. So it was the perfect place to set it. And I realised that I couldn't, and I genuinely looked around for a real place that I could sort of, add a few bits to and plonk this citadel, this carved mountain monastery in the middle of. And because there isn't a place, and I just thought I couldn't take such liberties with a real place. So in the end, I just invented this place, and because no real place suited the story, and the place had to be is intrinsic to the story and does have this character, because it's this place that has effectively the legend is that there's this sacrament, this sacred relic that is kept in this monastery, which is carved out of this vertical mountain in the middle of this town, which was grown up around it, that has supposedly got some sort of divine power, and it was the foundation upon which ultimately Christianity and lots of the Abrahamic religions were built. And no one's seen it, because people go into the mountain, only men, patriarchal, proper monastery, and no one ever comes out. And that's how they've kept a secret of what this thing is and whether it even exists. And so I liked this idea that you've got this effectively this almost medieval monastery surrounded by kind of Disneyland almost, because this huge industry has grown up of the sacrament and what's the sacrament and whatever, and people just go there. It's a bit like Lourdes or Santiago de Compostela, all these kind of places where these kind of shrine places which have become industry. The Vatican is another one. These huge industries have grown up, and tourists go there. This kind of religious, this spiritual tourism, and so that's where it came from. And it was a slow process of building it, because I had to kind of build it from the ground up and think about the history, and a lot of it's borrowed. I mean, interestingly, the main character, who's American, she flies in, and she flies to a city called Gaziantep, which exists and is indeed one of the oldest continually inhabited cities in the world. And so she flies in there and gets on a cab and then drives up into the foothills of the Taurus Mountains to Ruin. So that journey from Gaziantep up into the foothills is where she sort of goes off the map. Because Gaziantep is real, New York, New Jersey, a lot of it takes place there, is all real, and so it's only when they go up to Ruin that it sort of slightly goes into the crease of a map, as I describe it.
Yeah, and I mean, you take a lot of these ideas from places around the world. Did you do a lot of travel for your research, or are you a travel junkie like I am?
I did some. I kind of didn't do much travel for. I did do some travel for this, but it wasn't specifically for this, although it turned out that way. But before I was a full-time novelist, I worked for nearly 20 years in television. And when I was cutting my teeth as a director, there were just every other program on television seemed to be a travel program or a holiday program. So I made a lot of those, and I traveled everywhere, making these little kind of holiday programs, travel adventure programs. And it's amazing how much of that I have drawn on and continue to draw on when I'm writing. I sort of need a place, and I think of somewhere I've been, and with Google Maps now, you can go back there from your desk and whatever. But there's loads of stuff, and I go back to old photographs of me looking, ridiculously young and thin and not great at all, or wrinkly, and go back there, and it's really you draw. I think you're constantly the good thing about writer is it makes you reanalyze the stuff that you've done and think about them and make sense of them and revisit these places. It gives you an excuse to sort of navel gaze a bit, but with a purpose. So I did a lot of travel, but then the story about the travel that specifically feeds into Sanctus and Ruin, the city of Ruin, is that having worked for nearly 20 years in television, I kind of was getting a tiny bit jaded. I was just ending up making the same programs that I'd made several times before. And I'd always wanted to write a book. I'd always, from my 18-year-old self, staring out at the vast vista of my life ahead, said, "Yep, definitely going to be a novel in there somewhere." And I was approaching 40 and was like, "Where's the novel? Where's the novel then?" My 18-year-old self was tapping me on the shoulder and going, "Yeah, you really let me down on the novel front." And with a full-time career and a young family and everything, it's really hard to find the time to. You can't just knock off a novel. You can't. It's like saying, "I'm just going to pop out and run a marathon." It's like you need to prepare, you need to do it. It takes time. It takes a lot out of you. And I thought I couldn't. The job working in television was very creatively exhausting. I won't say it was demanding necessarily, but it was quite creatively exhausting. And I didn't want to do that thing of, sort of carving out a bit of a weekend and going, now I'm tired and I've had a hell of a week, but now the novel, and sort of just do it firing on, 2 cylinders. So I kind of took the decision, maybe it was a midlife crisis, possibly, to just take some time off. So I quit my job and took 6 months off. And rather than sit in my spare room depressingly sort of in my pants trying to write a novel, people going, how's Simon doing with the novel with me with a kind of big beard? My eldest was not quite in school yet, so we said, well, why don't we just go somewhere? Let's go somewhere for 6 months and have an adventure. And part of it was me thinking, if I fail at writing the book, I can always then describe this time as that time we spent in France, as it turned out, rather than that time I failed to write a book. So I was kind of future-proofing my own failure. And so that's what we did. We rented our place out in Brighton, where we live in England, and rented a place in this middle of the countryside in the south of France in December, in winter, because it's cheaper, and spent 6 months here. And I wrote the first about 180 pages of a book that was then called Ruin, and then came to be known as Sanctus a year and a half later when I finally finished it, after going back to work and having to do the weekend thing and all that stuff that I was trying to avoid.
Yeah, it's quite a story. And I'm interested because you use a combination of Christian ideas and pagan myths and historical stuff in the book. How do you feel you walk the line between kind of orthodox religion and people who like kind of Christian books, let's say, with a spiritual side of things? How do you think you've managed that line that Dan Brown kind of failed?
You've got the kind of Dan Brown fatwa on you now by saying such a thing. Well, I mean, it was really weird because when I came out to France to write my book, I had 2 or 3 ideas that I'd been kicking around in my head. Basically, the answer is I never set out to write a Christian book or a religious book. That was as far away from what I was intending to write as possible. So I had these 2 or 3 ideas, which were because I worked in commercial television, so I kind of knew I could write. I knew I'd spent 20 years writing scripts and stuff, so I knew I could kind of be creative on demand. I produced something, the quality of which was debatable and up for grabs, but I knew I could produce something. And I figured that what I should do is I should write something that was close to my own experience, because I wouldn't have to research it. And so I thought, modern, contemporary guy, a bit like me, thrown into extraordinary circumstances, very Hitchcock, very Holland Coburn, that kind of thing. And I thought, that's what I need to do. Then I don't have to research anything. And in 6 months, I can probably get a rough draft down of what the story is and, sort of work on characters and all that sort of stuff. Because the other thing I was aware of is I'd spent all this time writing scripts, but when you write scripts, you never describe anything. You never have to, because the camera, you point the camera and there it is. And so, it was a big new area of writing that I needed to sort of develop quickly. And so, again, let's set it in the modern era, because you can just look at it and describe it. You don't have to research, all that sort of stuff. So all of these reasons. So I had these 2 or 3 ideas. And it was only when we were driving to France in December, because it was cheap, at the start of our adventure, and I was in a van full of a bunch of stuff, mostly soft toys, to make our rented house in France look homely for when the children arrived a couple of days later. So it was here's your new home, and here's your stuff. So it's home, kind of thing. We set sail on the midnight ferry, and we were going to drive. It's a day's drive to get to where we are in France. It's way in the south, near Toulouse. And being 1st of December, we went from Newhaven to Dieppe, and this huge storm just blew up in the channel, and we didn't get any sleep because we caught the midnight ferry because we were going to sleep and then drive through the night and the day to get there, and we had no sleep at all. So we just arrived thankfully in France alive, and needed to go and find a hotel somewhere. So we drove an hour inland, and an hour inland from Dieppe is Rouen. And as we were coming in, the storm had blown out and dawn was starting to kind of lighten the sky. And I saw the silhouette of Rouen Cathedral up on the hill. And it's a very weird cathedral, Rouen Cathedral. It's got this kind of hypodermic syringe of a needle of a spire that sort of pierces the sky. And these kind of bits, it's very Gothic and weird. It's almost like a spider. It's a strange thing. And when I saw it, this quote just popped into my head that I'd read years ago and always liked and kind of always wondered, and kind of carried around with me in in that sort of way, like picking up a shiny thing and putting it in your pocket. And the quote is the one that's at the beginning of Sanctus, which is the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, which is, "A man is a god in ruins." And there was something about that quote and the image of the cathedral and the play on words of Rouen, ruin, that just planted the seed. And then we went and slept in a hotel for a few hours and got up and then carried on driving. And the radio in this old van that we'd got broke. So for 8 hours, I was on my own with just this idea kind of whirring around in my head. And by the time we got to the house, it had just taken root. And of course, it was nothing like the things I was going to write. It required a huge amount of research. In the end, it required a huge amount of building a whole town city from scratch, history and all, and legends and mythology and all. But it was the best idea. It was totally the best idea I had. I just knew it was the best idea. And so these other ideas that I've still never written just fell by the wayside, and I just started writing this thing. And so I think because it kind of came out of this idea of just recognizing a good story, it wasn't like I went, "Oh, Dan Brown sold lots of books, I'll do one of those," or anything. I mean, if anything, more of an influence is Name of the Rose, which was written 23 years before Da Vinci Code. People, and because Da Vinci Code was large in everyone's sights when Sanctus was coming out, everyone was like, "Oh, is this? Did you read the Da Vinci Code and whatever?" And in actual fact, I only read the Da Vinci Code about halfway through writing Sanctus, and I suddenly panicked and thought, "What if I'm actually writing the same story?"
Which is nothing like it, actually.
No, I know, but but then, I kind of picked it up, and page 1, there's a monk, and I'm like, "Oh, great, there we go." It's just like 9 months of work, just throw it. And then, of course, page 2, I'm like, "No, and by the time page 4 or 5, I was like, "Yeah, no, it's totally different, it's fine." But the other thing is, all the ideas of it come out of the story. It's not like I have kind of a checklist of like, "Oh, I like this stuff, so I'm going to write something about this." I had the idea, and basically I had the end, what I came up with almost first was the end of the first book. And I didn't set out to write a trilogy. It was, I had no deal or agent or anything. It was just, let's try and write the best book I can, which is why I picked this ridiculously hard idea in the end. And so I worked backwards from that of like, well, if this is the big secret, and the engine of Sanctus is, what is the sacrament? Does it exist, and what is it? And because it's a patriarchal, secretive monastery, and that only men have ever been allowed to go in, of course, as a writer, what you want to do is make things really hard for your protagonist. So who's the best person? Who's the most unlikely person to discover that secret? A woman. So I worked backwards, and so my main character became a woman. And again, people are like, "Oh, did you write a strong female character because there's a gap in the market because there aren't that many of them?" And it's like, no, I didn't. I wasn't that smart, and kind of, this is good. This is really, it's like I had a meeting with my people and went, "Okay, here's the pie chart of what people are reading, and I think there's a gap here. Should we do this? Should we do this? Women, hands up for a woman." Everything grew organically out of the story, including the religious stuff, because the whole point of the idea is that this mystical relic, even though it's kind of been co-opted by Christianity, it predates it, and kind of Christianity grew out of it. And I have the cross that suckered you into buying it, which was on the cover, which is the Tau, which is the T-shaped cross. Favoured by the new Pope, in fact, going back to Francis of Assisi, which predates the Latin cross. And actually, when you read about it, it would have been the cross that they would have crucified Christ on, because the Romans were, what do we know about the Romans? They were very efficient. And building one of those, a carpenter building something like that, is mortise joints, it's complicated carpentry. And they were crucifying a lot of people. So they was like, what's an easier one? Something like that with a cross thing on it, balanced.
Stick
with
on
a little,
the top,
really easy. So that is the cross. So the Christian cross should look like that. It shouldn't look like that. And so you sort of have all these things, and you kind of go, that's interesting. And so let's just kind of go and play with these myths and these kind of preconceptions, and go back and take a symbol that predated it, and was very much kind of seen as it's in Egyptian spiritual the kind of canon, and it goes back beyond that. It's a pagan symbol as well. It's like, and so that's where it came from. If I blend it together well, it's just because I think it's because it's all serving the story. It's not the other way around. It's not like, here's all this stuff, how can I kind of cobble a story together or bolt it to it. And it's just, and actually, religion or theology as a subject that I know you're very familiar with is really about ideas. It's about ideas to do with belief in God and all this sort of gods plural, and it's endlessly fascinating because they're mystical mirrors that reflect our own situation, all of them, and so that's I think why we're endlessly fascinated by it. And it's there, and actually if you really sort of drill down to it, they're just full of brilliant stories.
Yeah.
Brilliant stories. The most amazing, brilliant stories.
Yeah.
And so that's, as a writer, it's just an endless, it's like a bottomless pit. It's like a well that will never run dry. It's like there's always something in there. There's always something interesting, and there's always another take to put on it. I mean, the hardest thing I think is doing the modern thriller thing against that, and making that work without having to have that the history lesson bit where the expert goes, "Let me tell you about this thing that you don't know about," because otherwise the plot won't work. It's that exposition. Yeah, it's really the hard thing. Where the expert explains stuff to the idiot.
Yeah, and so what are you writing next? What's your plan next?
Well, I've just finished the first draft of the new book. I'm doing second draft now, so I'm kind of going into that, which is a new series character. So it's similar territory, and it's about a man who doesn't know who he is and is on an epic journey of redemption, and it's kind of mystical, but also it's modern again, and he has to kind of travel to various places, to go to various dangerous places. All of these places have secrets, and kind of find the secret and fix something. And in each place, he learns a bit about himself. It's very roughly based on the 10 Commandments, so it might be 10 books with each one very loosely themed on one of the commandments, and he has to sort of go and kind of redress the balance of these kind of holy laws that have been put out of kilter. But largely, it's a modern thriller. It's kind of, they're more like westerns, I think. I mean, this first one's set in Arizona, but the second one might be set on a boat, and the third one might be set in France.
Arizona. I love Arizona.
Arizona's great. Arizona is amazing, isn't it?
It's I love it. I'd live there. I reckon I could live there in the red Sedona kind of deserty bit.
It's beautiful and weird and alien, and it's like being on a different planet. I have very Celtic skin, and so I'm like a vampire. So I don't think I could cope with the heat there because it is ridiculously hot. They close everything in the summer because it's too hot. It's like, their summer is the winter because it's bearably hot rather than ridiculously, stupidly, life-threateningly hot.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I'm going to look forward to those. So where can people find you and your books online?
Well, I am on Facebook. I'm Simon Toyne author, I think. Yes, Simon Toyne author. And I'm Simon Toyne Twitter, at Simon Toyne, all one word, lowercase. And I've got a website, simontoyne.net, which is going to be overhauled soon, for the new book. And you can buy my books anywhere, sort of Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Worcester's, anywhere. And HarperCollins, I think they've got their own thing now, so you can buy it direct from them, I believe, now. It's the future.
Thanks so much for your time, Simon. That was great.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure. Nice talking to you.